The sharp crack of metal against concrete echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood as Miguel Ramirez dismantled the above-ground pool that had been his family's summer salvation for the past 3 years. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the cool September air, a reminder that summer was truly over. The leaves had begun their annual transformation, painting the neighborhood in warm hues of amber and crimson, and the evening air carried the unmistakable crispness of approaching autumn. Miguel had decided it was finally time. The pool, a 24-foot round oasis that had hosted countless barbecues, birthday parties, and lazy Sunday afternoons, was showing signs of wear. Rather than risk a midwinter collapse that would flood his meticulously maintained backyard, he'd chosen this peaceful Saturday to take it down before the first frost. His 2 children, Elena and Marco, had already sent their dramatic goodbyes, promising the empty patch of yard would become a soccer field until next summer's replacement arrived. He was halfway through disconnecting the metal frame when he felt the sensation of being watched. Miguel turned to find his neighbor, Karen Wheeler, standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face a mask of poorly concealed contempt. "Afternoon, Karen," Miguel called out with forced cheerfulness. In the 3 years since his family had moved into the neighborhood, Karen had never quite warmed to them. Her complaints about noise, parking, and the occasional weekend gatherings had become so routine that Miguel's wife, Sofia, had started a bingo card of Karen's grievances. Karen didn't return the greeting. Instead, she took 2 deliberate steps forward, her gaze fixed on the partially dismantled pool. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the yard with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to being heard. Miguel gestured to the obvious work in progress, taking down the pool for the season. "We do this every year, Karen." "Without a permit?" Karen's eyebrows arched so high they nearly disappeared into her meticulously highlighted blonde bob. Miguel stared at her, wrench suspended midair. "I don't need a permit to take down my own pool. I installed it, I maintain it, and I take it down each year." "Actually," Karen said, producing her phone from her pocket with the flourish of a magician revealing a rabbit. "According to the Homeowners Association bylaws, Section 4.3, any modifications to exterior structures require prior written approval." Miguel set his tools down, wiping his hands on his jeans as he took a calming breath. "Karen, this isn't a modification. The pool doesn't permit. It comes down every fall and goes back up every summer." Karen's lips thinned into a line so tight it seemed to defy the laws of physics. "The agent OA considers anything that alters the appearance of your property a modification. You should have submitted the proper paperwork." "For taking down my own pool? That's ridiculous." Miguel turned back to his work, determined not to let Karen's interruption derail his afternoon. "Besides, I'm pretty sure the HOA president gave me verbal approval when we moved in." Karen's scandalized gasp was theatrical enough to merit an award. "Verbal approval? There's no such thing. All approvals must be documented and filed properly with the board." Miguel continued working, hoping his silence would encourage Karen to leave. It didn't. "I'm going to have to report this," she announced, fingers already tapping furiously at her phone screen. "This is a clear violation of—" "Karen," Miguel interrupted, his patience wearing thin, "it's my pool on my property. I'm not building anything, I'm putting something away for the winter. Please let me finish in peace." Karen's face flushed an alarming shade of red. "This isn't over," she warned, retreating to her property line. "Not by a long shot." Miguel didn't realize just how prophetic those words would prove to be, nor that within the hour, he'd be explaining to police officers why dismantling his own pool wasn't, in fact, a crime worthy of an emergency response. Miguel returned to his work, the metal components of the pool frame clanking as he stacked them neatly beside the shed. He tried to shake off the unpleasant encounter with Karen, but her words lingered like a bad taste. From the corner of his eye, he could see her pacing behind her kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. He sighed and continued dismantling the pool liner. Sofia emerged from the house carrying a glass of lemonade, her dark curls bouncing as she navigated the yard. "I saw Karen out here earlier," she said, handing the cold drink to Miguel. "What was that about?" "The usual," Miguel replied, gratefully accepting the lemonade. "Apparently we need HOA permission to take down our own pool. She threatened to report us." Sofia rolled her eyes. "That woman needs a hobby that doesn't involve policing the neighborhood." She glanced toward Karen's house. "Is she taking pictures of our yard?" Miguel turned to see Karen standing at her property line with her phone raised, clearly documenting what she perceived as a grievous violation of community standards. He waved at her with exaggerated friendliness, which only made her disappear back into her house with startling speed. "Let her take all the pictures she wants," Miguel said, draining his lemonade. "I got nothing to hide. It's just a pool." 45 minutes later, Miguel had drained most of the water into the designated drainage area at the back of their property, a process he carefully researched to ensure compliance with local regulations. The remaining puddle would evaporate soon enough. He was folding the pool liner when the distinctive sound of a siren pierced the afternoon quiet. At first, Miguel thought it must be headed elsewhere, perhaps to the main road a few blocks away, but the siren grew louder before abruptly cutting off directly in front of his house. He straightened up, confused, as two police officers emerged from a patrol car and approached his front gate. "Is there a problem, officers?" Miguel asked, setting down the pool liner and walking toward them. Behind the police, he could see several neighbors emerging from their homes, curiosity drawing them to their front yards. "We received a 911 call about an unauthorized construction project and possible water hazard," the taller officer explained, looking somewhat embarrassed as his eyes scanned the obviously half-dismantled pool. "Are you the homeowner?" Miguel nodded, bewilderment giving way to realization. "Yes, I'm Miguel Ramirez, and there's no construction happening here. I'm taking down my family's pool for the winter." The second officer, a woman with a practical ponytail and skeptical expression, consulted her notepad. "The caller reported that you're violating HOA regulations and creating a potential flood risk to adjacent properties." A flash of movement caught Miguel's attention. Karen had emerged from her house and was making her way across the street with the determined stride of someone about to right a terrible wrong. Her face held the unmistakable expression of vindication. "That would be my neighbor," Miguel said quietly to the officers. "She seems to think I need special permission to dismantle a temporary pool on my own property." Sophia appeared beside Miguel, her face a mixture of concern and indignation. "You call the police?" she asked Karen incredulously as the neighbor approached. "For this?" Karen lifted her chin. "I called because your husband is violating HOA bylaws and creating a public nuisance. That pool water could damage surrounding properties, and he has no permit for either installation or removal." The female officer looked from Karen to the Ramirez family, then to the pool, which was clearly being responsibly dismantled. "Ma'am, 911 is for emergencies. This doesn't appear to be an emergency situation." "It most certainly is," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "He's releasing thousands of gallons of chlorinated water into the ground without proper drainage permits. That's an environmental hazard." Miguel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I drained it exactly as recommended by the manufacturer and the city guidelines. The small amount left will evaporate." The officers exchanged glances. The taller one turned to Karen. "Have you spoken with your HOA board about this specific issue?" "I've left 3 messages," Karen said, crossing her arms. "But I felt it was my civic duty to report this violation immediately. You never know what could happen with all this water and equipment." The female officer made a note in her pad before addressing Miguel. "Sir, you have documentation regarding your pool installation and any relevant HOA approvals." "Of course," Miguel replied, relief washing over him. "I can show you everything, including the seasonal setup and takedown guidelines provided by the manufacturer." As Miguel turned toward the house to retrieve his documentation, he caught sight of their neighbors watching from across the street. Some looked concerned, others amused, and a few were clearly recording the scene on their phones. This would be neighborhood gossip for weeks. Elena and Marco had appeared at the front door, their expressions confused and alarmed at the presence of police officers in their yard. What had begun as a simple end-of-summer task had somehow spiraled into a public spectacle, and Miguel couldn't help but wonder what Karen would do next if the police didn't side with her. One thing was certain: this was far from over. Miguel returned from the house with a well-worn manila folder, its edges softened from frequent handling. Inside was a meticulously organized collection of documents, proof of his thorough research and compliance with every regulation he could possibly identify. He spread the papers on the patio table as the officers approached, Karen hovering nearby with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This is the manufacturer's manual with seasonal storage guidelines," Miguel explained, pointing to highlighted sections. "And here's my copy of the city ordinance regarding temporary structures on residential properties. According to Section 5.2, above-ground pools under 30 inches deep don't require building permits for installation or removal." The female officer nodded, reviewing the documents with professional interest. "These appear to be in order, Mr. Ramirez." Karen scoffed loudly enough to ensure everyone heard. "That's the city ordinance, but what about the HOA regulations? Those supersede city guidelines in our community." Miguel slid another document from the folder. "Here's the approval I received from the HOA board 3 years ago when we first installed the pool. Note paragraph 2, which explicitly acknowledges the seasonal nature of the structure and approves both installation and removal as part of regular seasonal maintenance." The taller officer reviewed the document, nodding. "This seems to address the HOA concern, ma'am. There's a signature here from—" He squinted at the page. "Gerald Thompson, HOA president." Karen's face flushed deeply. "That's impossible. Gerald would never approve something like this without a formal meeting." "Let me see that." She snatched the paper from the officer's hand, scanning it frantically. Her eyes widened as she recognized the signature. This was 3 years ago. You need annual approval for recurring modifications. Sophia, who had been comforting the children on the porch, stepped forward. That's not what the bylaws state, Karen. We've reviewed them carefully. Article 7, Section 3 specifically mentions that approvals for seasonal structures remain valid unless the board issues a written revocation. Karen seemed momentarily stunned by Sophia's precise knowledge of the HOA rules. She recovered quickly, though pivoting to a new angle of attack. Well, what about the drainage? You can't just release all that chemically treated water into the ground. It's an environmental hazard. I've seen him dumping it along the property line near my prize hydrangeas. Miguel sighed, pulling out yet another document. I haven't used chlorine in the pool for over 2 weeks preparing for this exact process. Here's my water testing from yesterday showing that the pH and chemical levels are within acceptable limits for ground discharge according to county environmental standards. And I'm draining it at the far corner of my property, nowhere near your hydrangeas, using this soaker hose to prevent erosion. He pointed to the black porous hose stretching toward the back of the yard, designed to release water slowly into the soil. It's actually the recommended method in the city's water conservation guidelines. The female officer made a few notes before addressing Karen directly. Ma'am, from what we can see, Mr. Ramirez appears to be following appropriate procedures for dismantling his pool. There doesn't seem to be any code violation or safety hazard that would warrant police intervention. Karen's indignation visibly mounted. But what about the noise? And the visual disruption to the neighborhood aesthetic? Our property values could be impacted by this eyesore. She gestured wildly at the partially dismantled pool. Ma'am, the taller officer said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Dismantling a pool during daylight hours doesn't violate any noise ordinances, and temporary disruptions to yard appearance aren't police matters. A new voice joined the conversation. Is there a problem here, officers? Everyone turned to see a man in his 60s approaching from across the street. His neat button-down shirt bore an embroidered logo, Oakwood Estates OA. Gerald, Karen exclaimed, her voice rising with renewed hope. I'm so glad you're here. These people are violating HOA regulations with their pool removal, and they're trying to claim you approved it. Gerald Thompson, the HOA president himself, surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had mediated countless neighborhood disputes. I did approve it, Karen. 3 years ago, and it remains valid. He turned to the officers. I apologize for any confusion. The Ramirez family has always been in full compliance with our guidelines. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, no words emerging. The officers exchanged knowing glances. It seems this matter is resolved, the female officer concluded, closing her notepad. Mr. and Mrs. Ramirez, you're free to continue with your pool dismantling. Ms. Wheeler, she addressed Karen directly, I need to remind you that 911 is reserved for genuine emergencies. Misuse of emergency services can result in fines or other penalties. As the officers prepared to leave, Gerald approached Miguel and Sophia. Again, I apologize for the disturbance. Rest assured the board will be discussing appropriate use of community resources at our next meeting. Karen remained frozen in place, her face cycling through various shades of red as the realization of her public defeat sank in. Neighbors who had been watching the drama unfold from a distance began to return to their homes, some shaking their heads, others whispering among themselves. Miguel thanked the officers and Gerald and turned back to his work, hoping this would be the end of the matter. But as he caught sight of Karen's expression, a mixture of humiliation and simmering fury, he knew with absolute certainty that this was merely the intermission in a performance that was far from over. By Sunday morning, Miguel had nearly forgotten about the previous day's confrontation. The pool was mostly dismantled, its components neatly organized in their garage for winter storage. Only the slight depression in the grass where the pool had stood served as a reminder of its seasonal presence. He stood in the kitchen brewing coffee and planning to spend the day restoring the yard to its pre-pool state. His phone buzzed on the counter, then again, and again. Curious, he picked it up to find a barrage of notifications from neighbors and friends. Have you seen next door? Sophia asked, entering the kitchen with her own phone in hand, her expression a mixture of disbelief and amusement. We're trending. Miguel took his wife's phone and stared at the screen. Someone, their teenage neighbor Tyler by the username, had posted a video titled Karen Kale's 911 on family for taking down their own pool. The 2-minute clip, clearly filmed from across the street, captured Karen's animated gestures as she spoke to the police officers, Miguel's calm presentation of his documentation, and Gerald's ultimate vindication of the Ramirez family. The post had accumulated over 300 comments overnight, an unprecedented level of engagement for their sleepy suburban community's forum. Oh no, Miguel groaned, scrolling through the responses. Most were supportive of his family, expressing disbelief at Karen's behavior and applauding his preparedness. Some shared their own Karen encounters in the neighborhood. A few questioned whether calling the police had been racial profiling, a suggestion that made Miguel's stomach tighten. "It gets worse," Sophia said, taking her phone back and opening another app. "Tyler's sister put it on TikTok. It's got thousands of views already." Miguel set down his coffee. This is going to make things even more uncomfortable with Karen. As if summoned by her name, their phones simultaneously pinged with a notification from the HOA group chat, a lengthy message from Karen herself. "I feel compelled to address the misleading video circulating about yesterday's incident," it began. "As a concerned citizen and dedicated member of this community, I acted in what I believe to be the best interest of all residents when I reported potential code violations. The selective editing of this video fails to show Mr. Ramirez's initial hostility and refusal to acknowledge HOA guidelines." Sophia read aloud, her eyebrows climbing higher with each sentence. "While I respect the police officer's assessment, I maintain that proper procedures were not followed, and I have filed a formal complaint with the HOA board requesting a special meeting to review our community standards for seasonal structures and the approval process thereof." Miguel ran a hand through his hair. "She's doubling down." "Wait, there's more," Sophia continued. "Furthermore, I am deeply disturbed by the cyberbullying I have experienced since this incident, including derogatory comments and invasion of my privacy. I am consulting with legal counsel regarding the unauthorized recording and distribution of my likeness during this dispute. I trust that as neighbors, we can resolve our differences with maturity and respect for community standards." The message concluded with a reminder about the upcoming fall decoration guidelines. "Consulting with legal counsel?" Miguel echoed incredulously. "Over a video of her calling the police on us for no reason." Their doorbell rang, startling them both. Through the front window, they could see Alina and Marco's friend Zoe from 3 doors down, practically bouncing with excitement on their porch. "Mr. and Mrs. Ramirez," the 12-year-old exclaimed when Sophia opened the door. "You're famous. My cousin in Phoenix sent me the pool video. She doesn't even know you guys." Miguel and Sophia exchanged alarmed glances. The video had already spread beyond their community. "Zoe," Sophia said gently, "that video shows a disagreement between neighbors that got out of hand. It's not something to celebrate, okay?" Zoe's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but Karen is always complaining about everything. "My mom says she tried to report our Halloween decorations last year for being excessively spooky." Miguel couldn't help but smile at that. Still, it's not kind to enjoy someone else's embarrassment, even if they sometimes make life difficult. As Zoe left to find Alina and Marco, Miguel's phone rang. It was Gerald Thompson. "Miguel," the HOA president said without preamble, "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. This situation has escalated beyond a simple neighbor dispute. Karen has filed formal complaints against you, against me for improper approval procedures, and against the teenagers who recorded the video." Miguel closed his eyes, feeling a tension headache forming. Gerald. The Oakwood Estates Community Center hadn't seen this kind of turnout since the contentious vote on allowing backyard chicken coops 3 years earlier. By 4 p.m. Sunday, the parking lot was full and residents were filing into the modest building with expressions ranging from irritation to barely concealed excitement. What had been scheduled as an emergency HOA board meeting had morphed into something resembling a town hall after Karen's social media campaign. Miguel and Sophia arrived deliberately late, hoping to avoid being the center of attention as they entered. Their strategy failed spectacularly. The low murmur of conversation died as they walked in, and dozens of eyes turned in their direction. The room had clearly divided into factions. Karen and a small group of supporters occupied the front right section, while most of their immediate neighbors had claimed the left side. Gerald Thompson stood at the podium looking weary beyond his years. "Ah, the Ramirez family has joined us. Now we can begin." He cleared his throat. "This emergency meeting has been called to address concerns regarding seasonal structure guidelines and proper approval procedures." Karen sat ramrod straight in her chair, a thick binder open on her lap and at least 3 different colored highlighters lined up beside it. Her husband Tom slouched beside her, his expression suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else in the world at that moment. "Before we start," Gerald continued, "I want to remind everyone that this is a civil discussion about community guidelines, not a forum for personal attacks or accusations." His gaze lingered meaningfully on Karen, who met his eyes with defiant intensity. "Now, regarding a specific complaint about the Ramirez family's pool removal." "If I may, Gerald," Karen interrupted, rising to her feet. Without waiting for permission, she approached the podium with her binder. "I prepared a comprehensive presentation on the procedural violations at issue." Gerald reluctantly stepped aside, and Karen claimed the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd been rehearsing for this moment. "Neighbors," she began, scanning the room, What happened yesterday represents more than just one family's disregard for our community standards. It exemplifies a troubling pattern of selective enforcement that threatens the very foundations of our neighborhood's character and property values. She opened her binder and began a meticulously organized presentation, complete with enlarged photographs of Miguel's dismantled pool, highlighted excerpts from the HOA bylaws, and a timeline of what she called escalating violations in the community. Sophia gripped Miguel's hand tightly as Karen displayed a series of photos of their backyard taken over the past 3 years, clearly shot from her upstairs window with a zoom lens. The invasion of privacy made Miguel's skin crawl. Furthermore, Karen continued, now 20 minutes into her presentation despite growing restlessness in the room, the intimidation tactics employed against me when I rightfully questioned these violations must be addressed. I have been subjected to online harassment, invasion of privacy through unauthorized recording, and implied threats. A neighbor from down the street, Mrs. Patel, raised her hand. What threats, exactly? I watched the video, and the Ramirez family was extremely polite throughout the entire interaction. Karen's lips tightened. The threat was implied in their tone and manner, and they've since orchestrated a social media smear campaign. They didn't post the video, interrupted Tyler's mother from the back row. My son did, and he's removed it at our request. Though frankly, I don't think he needed to. The public has a right to know when someone misuses emergency services. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Karen flipped to another section of her binder. Regardless, I move that the board issue an immediate fine to the Ramirez family for improper pool removal procedures and require them to submit detailed applications for any future exterior modifications, including seasonal storage of equipment. Gerald reclaimed the podium. Thank you, Karen, for your thorough presentation. Miguel, would you like to respond? Miguel stood clearing his throat. I'll be brief. Everything we did was approved and documented, as we showed the officers yesterday. We maintained our pool according to manufacturer guidelines and HOA rules for 3 years without incident. What's really at issue here isn't about a pool at all. He paused, looking directly at Karen. This is about control, and 3 weeks later, Miguel sat at his kitchen table surrounded by printouts of seasonal structure guidelines from neighboring HOAs, sample approval forms, and draft revisions to their own community's bylaws. The committee work had been every bit as tedious as he'd anticipated, made worse by Karen's insistence on hour-long Zoom meetings 3 times a week. Each session followed the same pattern. Karen would propose unnecessarily complex regulations, Miguel would counter with simpler alternatives, and the other committee members would mediate. Tonight was the final meeting before they presented their recommendations to the full HOA board, and Miguel was dreading it. Sophia placed a mug of coffee beside him and squeezed his shoulder. Last one, she reminded him. Then you're free. Miguel nodded, booting up his laptop. Unless the board rejects our proposal and sends us back to the drawing board. Don't even joke about that, Sophia warned, just as the Zoom call began. Karen appeared on screen, seated in what appeared to be a home office, a wall of meticulously labeled binders visible behind her. Good evening, everyone. I trust you've all reviewed my final revisions to Section 4.7 regarding the documentation requirements for seasonal structure removal. Miguel suppressed a sigh. Karen's final revisions had arrived at 11:38 p.m. the previous night, a 17-page document that essentially undid 2 weeks of compromise. Karen, he began carefully, we've already reached consensus on the simplified 1-page approval form and 3-year renewal cycle. Your new proposal would require homeowners to submit detailed plans and photographs every single time they want to set up or take down a seasonal item. Karen's lips thinned. Documentation ensures compliance. Without proper oversight, people will take advantage. Gerald, who had joined the committee as a moderator, cleared his throat. Let's remember our goal here. Creating clear, reasonable guidelines that protect community standards without imposing undue burden on residents. The meeting progressed with its usual tension, but as they approached the end of the agenda, Miguel noticed something odd. Karen seemed distracted, repeatedly glancing at something off-camera. Her normally laser-focused attention was fragmented, and twice she asked committee members to repeat themselves. During Gerald's summary of their final recommendations, Karen suddenly stood up. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "I need to attend to something." Her camera switched off abruptly. The remaining committee members exchanged puzzled looks. "Should we continue?" asked Mrs. Patel. "Let's wait a moment," Gerald suggested. "She may return shortly." 5 minutes passed with awkward small talk filling the silence. Just as Gerald was about to resume without Karen, they heard it. Faintly through Karen's still active microphone came the unmistakable sound of a siren growing louder. "Is that?" Miguel began. Gerald nodded grimly. "Sounds like emergency services." The meeting dissolved as curiosity overcame protocol. Miguel stepped outside onto his front porch and immediately saw the flashing lights at Karen's house across the street. Two police cruisers and what appeared to be a code enforcement vehicle were parked in her driveway. Neighbors emerged from surrounding houses, drawn by the commotion. Miguel hesitated, torn between curiosity and a reluctance to intrude on whatever crisis Karen was facing. Sophia joined him on the porch, handed him a jacket against the autumn chill, and made the decision for both of them. "Let's go see if they need help," she said, already moving toward the street. As they approached, they could hear Karen's voice rising above the general murmur. "Absolutely unauthorized. I documented every violation." The small crowd of neighbors parted to reveal Karen gesticulating wildly at a bewildered-looking man in a city uniform, while two police officers stood nearby, their expressions a mixture of patience and exasperation. Tom, Karen's husband, stood slightly apart, his face buried in his hands. "Ma'am," the code enforcement officer was saying, "as I've explained, the city has an easement on this portion of your property for utility access. The workers were authorized to trim back vegetation interfering with the power lines." Miguel finally understood. The large oak tree at the edge of Karen's property had been a source of pride for her, its branches stretching majestically over her meticulously maintained garden. Now one side of it had been significantly trimmed back, creating an asymmetrical appearance that would have been comical if not for Karen's obvious